Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Something Bad Thursday. I apologize that this video is being uploaded late. You might be wondering exactly who I am. Well, allow me to introduce myself. I am evil twin minion Michelle. Yes, unfortunately, the real Michelle isn't here, and she won't be here for this entire month of October. And you might be wondering, well, why is that? Well, that's because, like last year, I was able to take over this channel for the month of October, and I will be doing so again. But don't worry, the regular Michelle is totally fine. There's no issue. She's just a little tied up right now. So, without further ado, apologize, this is also being uploaded late. It took us a while to, you know, get her to, fork over the channel. But regardless, for this Something Bad Thursday, I am going to be discussing what you would probably even describe me as, considering the fact that I am technically evil twin minion Michelle, and that is the whole concept of evil. And we will be addressing such topics as well that revolve around Halloween. And Halloween has oftentimes been associated as the holiday of evil and of malicious activity. Um, and there is a lot to kind of absorb when it comes to this whole concept of evil. And so I will be discussing this for today's video. Now, I think it's obviously safe to say that evil throughout various cultures and through various interpretations, evil has been considered a super bad thing. Um, almost it's almost in its actually own category because it is so deplorable and hideous and oftentimes grotesque. And there is obviously good reasonings for that. Oftentimes, evil is sort of tossed around as um, sort of an insult. Other times, it's actually taken with a lot of seriousness and depth to it. Um, and I thought it would be interesting as we start off this month of Halloween to address this particular point. Now, evil has sort of two different, I think, interpretations. There is the religious, and this goes back to various uh, points in history where there were various different forms of religion, and therefore evil sort of blossomed into itself. In particular, within the Christian Judeo tradition, it sparked its sort of own identity and its even own place, which is where I'm from, technically. Hades, what you call it, or in the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's more called hell, or and you have a whole sort of hierarchy with the devil sort of being up on top, and he's the figure and representation of evil, and God being the representation of good and whatnot. Now, obviously, these religious uh, symbols have taken on a more broader perspective. Sometimes people would like to interpret evil as just wrong or immoral or not consistent with any real values. It's oftentimes associated with giving into uh, bad influence or negative impulses. Oftentimes. And we see this, I think, represented throughout entertainment. We see this throughout history as well. So evil entails a lot of different things, and oftentimes, sometimes even people don't even like to associate the word evil with really anything because they often think it has a religious connotation to it. But I think evil can be interpreted in a much broader sense. It doesn't necessarily have to be religious. I would really say it just more takes on a religious connotation since it's uh, largely having to do with history and sort of religious interpretation and understanding. So that is really how evil has been sort of categorized throughout the years, I'd say. And you oftentimes see too how the sort of moral values of what we consider good contrast to evil, and then oftentimes the religious um, kinds of morals sort of collide into the non-religious kind of ideas. So it's often fairly tricky to really pinpoint down an exact definition of evil, because if you look throughout history and you look through different people's cultural and religious perspectives and um, you know, look at their backgrounds, you might interpret evil in a different way than somebody else might. So it's really it's really, the evil is a word that just has a lot of power, but at the same time, it can either be taken fairly seriously or not as seriously as well. It's kind of like Halloween in that sense, you know, it brings out the sort of horror and the what we might consider perverse. I mean, obviously Halloween has been associated with horror films, and with horror films we see really horrible things happen, and almost we would consider those things to be evil. So it's really a word that has a huge amount of cultural as well as uh, even maybe psychological significance, because oftentimes people will say, well, is evil something that uh, is it something related to people's environment or the brain or whatnot? And oftentimes people will try to discover the sort of roots of evil and what drives people to become a certain way. And so it really has a lot of different meanings to what we ultimately define into the category of evil. Uh, but I think in regards to really Halloween, I don't think it is designed to be as a very serious concept. It's just kind of playing with the idea of evil. And you know, oftentimes too, there's the shades of gray that people talk about. Like sometimes people say, well, there's some things that maybe might be considered evil, but there's a lot of different layers to certain things, and we can't just see the world as just black and white. Although I think in certain instances, there's probably places where we could probably definitely make a categorization to be between good and evil. But really, when you look at it through the larger context, it just is such a really profound word, because the word is um, it just has a lot of power and weight to it. And Halloween, although you could say it's supposed to be the time of the dead and the time of getting scared and whatnot, it also is trying to bring out these sorts of evil like figures and scenarios and whatnot, and sort of bringing them to life in a way. And oftentimes you see how the evil that gets brought into the various circumstances that exist with maybe within entertainment, you see how, you know, there's always a hero to kind of overcome the ultimate evil that exists. And I think there's something true to that. This whole idea of that good sort of doesn't exist unless there is an opposite to it. Um, and I guess you could say evil is that kind of force, so to speak. It's almost like, you know, how in the Christian tradition you have the God who's the representation of good, and then you have the devil who's the representation of evil, and you see them sort of like kind of duke it out, kind of. And it's similar to how the hero fights a villain. within various other forms of entertainment. So it's really all just based on bringing about these really dark forces, and kind of just putting them out there, largely when you really look at it through uh, the perspective of Halloween. And in that sense, you always see the hero who tries to escape or tries to overcome the evil that is sort of presented in front of them. Um, and sometimes evil wins. Sometimes evil does ultimately triumph in some of these instances, and sometimes good ends up overcoming. So it's really trying to bring these ideas to the forefront. And largely, this word evil, although it is bad, and I think we would like to see less evil in this world. Um, it's almost like you can't. There always has to be some kind of challenge and obstacle, and oftentimes evil presents itself as a challenge and an obstacle. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's sort of seeing who ends up sort of triumphing. And that's really the whole concept of it that I think has largely spawned through entertainment and through various forms of mythology as well as through various religions. So it is very interesting. It has a lot of connotations to it, and I think oftentimes, we like to think of certain things as evil and other things as good, but at the end of the day, they sort of just exist, and it's almost like we just have to, try to deal with it in the best way and shape and form we can. But since I'm sort of evil incarnate, it only makes sense that I would be rooting for the bad guys. But, at the end of the day, it's really a fascinating idea. The whole philosophy that sort of exists with trying to bring this sort of concept to the forefront and having these two very polar opposites coming together and sort of battling one another. And it works with comics, it works in various instances, you could even say within real life. And I think that's why we like the whole idea of good and evil, because we like to defeat something that is destructive. And evil is really designed to be destructive and not to be a force of moving forward. It's kind of like it's trying to get everyone to kind of almost conform to basic instincts rather than try to lift people up to a higher way of being, so to speak. So in that sense, that's kind of what you can gander from the whole concept as well when it comes to evil in particular. But it is very interesting to really talk about this concept in particular. It does have a lot of different ideas, and you can come up with various different concepts when it comes to this whole word. And oftentimes people would argue if there even is evil, only because it obviously has had a very religious connotation to it. But I think it's, again, like I've said before, I think it can be in a broader sense. You don't have to necessarily have a certain understanding of the world and not disclude evil in a certain category or vocabulary, but it is largely based with myth and fantasy, but it also holds some weight within reality as well. So it's really fascinating in that sense. And it's the same with good as well, because, you know, we see good within fantasy and we also see good within reality. So it's really these two forces that really ultimately kind of are sort of part of the world as well as part of the realms of fiction. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say for this video. When I said that my minions will be taking over this channel, I mean that they take a variety of shape and forms. Some of them you might have seen, some of them you may not have seen before. And they will be discussing the various things that need to be discussed on this channel that revolve around the time of Halloween and the holiday of the dead, so to speak. And it should be very fascinating, and I hope you all have a wonderfully horrible time, because that's what Halloween is all about. But that's ultimately all I think I could say when it comes to this particular concept that I wanted to address. And it only makes sense since I'm the evil twin. But thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you all within the next video when I will be appearing. But good luck to the next minion that is coming up. And goodbye, everyone.